Get this. Something like 75%, nearly three-quarters, of native English speakers are making a pretty common grammar mistake every single day. And they don't even realize it. I know I felt kind of called out when I first heard that. Makes you think twice, huh?
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? Like, language is so automatic for us,
Yeah.
It's just how we communicate. But it's kind of wild how these little habits we picked up can actually lead us into, well, making the same mistake over and over again.
Totally. And while one little slip-up might not be a big deal, it's when they add up. That's when they can really affect how well people understand us. And honestly, it can even impact how professional we come across. So in this deep dive, let's tackle some of those everyday grammar gremlins, the ones that sneak in and maybe muddy up our message a bit.
Because at the end of the day, right, good grammar, it's not about memorizing a bunch of dusty rules. It's about making sure that what you want to say actually gets across the way you intended, being precise and avoiding misunderstandings.
And yeah, especially in a professional setting, it can definitely boost your credibility. And the good news is, a lot of times the fix is pretty simple once you're aware of the trap.
Exactly. You don't need to be a grammar whiz to get this right. Imagine, you're firing off an important email, maybe a proposal, or you're giving feedback to your team, or maybe you're about to give a presentation you've spent ages putting together. A small grammar error, it's not going to ruin everything, but it can be like a tiny snag in a smooth fabric. You know what I mean? It might cause your audience to, even just for a second, lose the thread of what you're saying. And those little snags, they can have a bigger impact than we think. It can make your meaning kind of fuzzy, so people have to reread or maybe guess at what you really meant. And it can subtly chip away at the professional image you're working to build. And maybe the most frustrating part is that if you're always sweating the small stuff, worrying about grammar, it can actually make you less confident in expressing yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So today, we're going to spotlight 5 of these repeat offenders, and we'll look at how to spot them, how to fix them, and how to avoid them in the first place. Let's start with subject-verb agreement. This is one I know I've had to really focus on to get right.
Yeah.
Let's look at this sentence. You go to the gym every morning. What's the problem here?
The issue is that the verb go, it doesn't quite fit with the subject he. See, in English, one of the big rules is this thing called subject-verb agreement. Basically, the verb needs to match up with the subject in terms of number, singular or plural, and person, first person like I, second person like you, or third person like he, she, it. In the present tense, when you have a singular third person subject like he, she, or it, you usually got to tack on an S or ES at the end of the base form of the verb. So the correct way to say it would be he goes to the gym every morning.
Right. That little S packs a punch, grammatically speaking. You mentioned person too. Can you explain how that plays into this mistake?
Sure. So it's with the third person singular he, she, and it that you see this rule in action. And that's where people tend to slip up. When you're dealing with first person singular like I or second person, both singular and plural like you, or third person plural like they or we, the verb usually stays in its base form in the present tense. Think of it this way. He, shit plus verb plus S versus I, you, they plus verb. So it's that third person singular that's got this specific requirement.
That's a good way to remember it. What are some other common examples where this agreement thing goes off the rails?
Oh, for sure. You might hear someone say, it makes sense. But because it's a singular subject, that third person thing, the verb needs that S on the end, right? So the correct way to say it would be, it makes sense. Or another one is, they wants a new car. In this case, they is plural. So the verb should be in its base form. They want a new car. Sometimes it's tricky because you might be thinking about the individual people within they and slip up with the singular verb.
Exactly. And you're so right. These are phrases we hear and use all the time. So those little errors can almost become invisible if we're not really paying attention. But in writing, especially in a professional setting, getting that agreement right, it just adds a layer of polish. Okay, let's move on to our second common slip-up. Using agree incorrectly. I've definitely seen this one around. What's not quite right about saying, I am agree with you?
So the main thing here is that agree, it's already a verb on its own. In the simple present tense, you don't need a form of to be like am, is, or are to say you agree with someone. The correct way, and it's more direct, is simply I agree with you. Adding that am in there makes it grammatically incorrect. It's like trying to make an action word even more actiony.
Verbifying the verb.
Oh,
I love that. Are there other words that often get tripped up in this same way?
Oh, absolutely. There are a bunch of verbs that express, a state of mind or an opinion that tend to follow this pattern. Think about words like disagree, consent, or accept, you would say, I disagree with the conclusion, not I am disagree with the conclusion. Same with, it should be they consent to the terms, not their consent to the terms, and she accepts the offer, not she is accept the offer. The action of agreeing or disagreeing or consenting, accepting, it already stands on its own.
Okay, so the takeaway is these words that describe actions, when you're using them in the simple present tense to talk about, a current state or opinion, you don't need that extra am, is, or are. Makes sense. Let's move on to negative statements, and specifically when you're talking about singular subjects, what's a mistake people make a lot here?
A super common one is using don't with those singular third-person subjects we were talking about before, like he, she, and it when you're making a negative sentence. So you might hear something like, she don't like apples. This happens because don't is like the go-to negative contraction for do not.
And what would be the correct way to say that?
You got to use doesn't, which is the short form of does not. So it becomes, she doesn't like apples. And this actually ties back to what we were talking about earlier, subject-verb agreement. Does is the form of do that agrees with those singular third-person subjects in the present tense. So when you make it negative, it becomes does not or doesn't.
Right, that connection back to subject-verb agreement really helps it stick. So we would correctly say, he doesn't eat meat. She doesn't play the piano. It doesn't need to be corrected. How does that contrast with plural subjects or when we use I or you?
When you're talking about plural subjects like they or we or the pronouns I and you, then don't is the correct way to go in those negative sentences. For example, they don't live in this city, I don't understand the question, and you don't need to worry. It's specifically that third person singular when you're talking about just one of something, a he, she, or it, that doesn't.
Okay, that's a helpful distinction. All right, let's tackle something that can be a bit tricky. The difference between past simple and present perfect. What's a common mistake you see people making here?
One of the most frequent ones is using the present perfect when the past simple is really the way to go, especially if a specific time in the past is mentioned. Like someone might say, I have visited Spain last summer.
What makes that grammatically off?
You see, that phrase, last summer, it clearly points to a specific time in the past that's done and dusted. Past simple tense, that's what you use to describe actions that happened and finished at a definite point in the past. Present perfect tense, that's the one with has or have, plus the past participle of the verb. You use that for actions that happened at some point before now, but you're not specifying exactly when, or for actions that started in the past and are still going on. That specific time marker, last summer, it signals that the past simple is the right tense to use. So it should be, I visited Spain last summer. So that time marker makes all the difference. If you've got a clear anchor in the past simple it is. If the time is more general or it's connected to now, present perfect is the winner. Could you give us some examples to really nail down the difference?
Of course. So imagine you want to talk about an experience you've had, but you don't want to say exactly when. You might say, I have visited Spain before. Here, the important part is that you had that experience. The time isn't important. But if you want to be specific about when, then you'd use the past simple. I visited Spain in 2021. There you've got that clear finished time frame. Another example, they have finished the project present perfect, meaning the project's done and might have some effect on the present, versus they finished the project on Tuesday. Past simple, you've got a specific completion date. Right, got it. So those specific time markers like last week, in 1995, even a few minutes ago, those are like big flashing signs to use past simple. And if it's more open-ended when it happened, or you're emphasizing the result or the experience itself, present perfect is usually the best choice.
Yeah.
Okay, last one for today. Grammar hurdle number 5. Misusing those comparative forms. What does that look like?
Usually it's using more with adjectives that already have a comparative form. You know, they end in or they're one of those irregular ones like better or worse. The classic example is, this cake is more better than the one I had yesterday. It's like trying to make something extra comparative, you know.
Ouch. Yeah, that sounds pretty clunky. How would you say it correctly?
Exactly. Better is already the comparative form of good, so adding more is just overkill. And grammatically incorrect. The right way is just, this cake is better than the one I had yesterday. Same goes for other comparative adjectives like worse, less, further. You wouldn't say more worse or more less. The comparative is already baked into the word.
Right, just like you wouldn't say something is very more. The more already implies a greater degree. Are there any rules of thumb to help us remember when to use "ir" and when to use "more" to make an adjective comparative?
Yeah, there are some good guidelines. So most one-syllable adjectives, you just tack on the "er," like fast becomes faster, tall becomes taller. A lot of two-syllable adjectives, especially those ending in "er," you swap the Y for "er." So happy becomes happier, easy becomes easier. For most other two-syllable adjectives, the ones that don't end in Y, and for most adjectives that have three or more syllables, that's when you use more before the adjective. For instance, interesting becomes more interesting. Complicated becomes more complicated. The main thing is if an adjective already has that comparative ending like "er," or it's one of those irregular comparatives like better, worse, or less, you don't need the extra more in there.
That's super helpful to remember. Earlier, you mentioned that mixing up the past simple and present perfect, that's a particularly impactful mistake. Can you tell us a little more about why getting this one right is so important for communicating clearly?
It's a big deal because choosing between these two tenses, it directly affects how people understand the timing of something and whether it's still relevant now. Like we talked about before, present perfect often suggests a connection to the present or a past that's not super defined. Past simple, though, it puts the action firmly in the past. Completed, done. When these get mixed up, it can be confusing. People might not be sure when something happened or if it still matters now. It messes with the timeline of what you're trying to say.
Got it. Can you think of an example where getting this tense thing wrong could cause a real misunderstanding, maybe in a work situation?
Picture this. You get an email from a project manager, and it says, I have sent the report yesterday. That have sent, it suggests the action's complete, the report's ready to go. But yesterday, that pins it down to a specific time in the past. See the disconnect. You might think, okay, was it sent yesterday and I should have it already? Or is it just sent now? It creates this kind of ambiguity that slows things down.
Right. You got to pause and figure out the timing. So how would you fix that sentence?
Easy. I sent the report yesterday. Clear, straightforward, no confusion about when it happened. At work, whether it's emails, presentations, even just quick updates, being clear about timelines is crucial for everyone to be on the same page and work together smoothly. Getting the tense right makes sure your message is precise. No accidental mix-ups about when things happened.
Absolutely. Clear communication builds trust and makes everything more efficient. Okay, we've covered a lot today with these 5 grammar points. What are some practical things people can do to really absorb this and avoid these traps in their own communication?
There are some concrete things you can do. One that's really effective is making an effort to read different kinds of well-written stuff. Good news articles, websites you trust, books, anything where you can see proper grammar in action. Pay attention to how sentences are put together, how those verbs and tenses are used. Seeing it over and over can really help those correct patterns sink in.
That's a great idea, like surrounding yourself with good grammar. What else?
Another good one is to actively practice writing. It doesn't have to be fancy essays or anything. Even keeping a journal, being a bit more careful with your emails, or trying to write little stories can help. The key is to then go back and look over what you wrote, specifically looking for those 5 common errors we've been talking about. Catching your own mistakes is a powerful way to learn.
So it's about putting the rules into practice and then becoming your own editor. How about grammar checking software?
Grammar checkers, they can definitely be helpful, especially for catching typos and maybe some basic grammar mistakes. It's like a final safety net. But really important, don't rely on them completely. They're not perfect. Sometimes they'll flag something that's actually fine, or they'll miss a more subtle error in meaning or tense. The goal is to train your own eye to spot these things.
So true. It's a tool to help us, not to do the thinking for us. Any other tips?
Yeah, definitely take the time to learn from your own slip-ups. If you notice you keep making the same grammar mistake, or if someone gives you feedback on something you wrote, make a note of it. Write it down even. Keeping a list of your personal grammar gremlins and looking at it every now and then can be super helpful. If you focus on the things you personally struggle with, you can make some real progress.
I like that personalized approach. It's focusing on your own growth areas instead of trying to remember every single rule in the book. One final piece of advice.
Try to understand the why behind the grammar rule, not just the what. When you grasp the logic, like why past simple and present perfect give you different info about time, then it's way easier to use those rules correctly. It goes beyond just memorizing to actually understanding, which leads to better and more confident use of grammar.
Awesome. Those are some actionable things people can start doing today. So let's do a quick review of what we've covered in this deep dive. We talked about subject-verb agreement and how those verb endings are super important for singular subjects. Using Agree correctly all by itself as a verb. Meeting doesn't with those singular subjects in negative sentences. The big difference between past simple and present perfect and how they tell you when actions happened, and avoiding those redundant comparatives like more, better.
Yep, that's it. And, each of these things might seem like a small detail on its own, but if you can master them all together, they can make a huge difference in how clear, accurate, and professional your communication is. It's all about those little nuances that people might not consciously notice, but can really influence how your message comes across.
All right, so here's a challenge for you, dear listener. Think about your own writing and speaking recently. Can you remember a time where you used one of these grammatical structures? And did you maybe make one of these common mistakes? From now on, just try to pay a little more attention to your own grammar and see if you catch yourself slipping up. Just becoming more aware, that's a huge first step.
For sure. Good communication, it's not about using fancy words or super long sentences. It's about getting your ideas across clearly, accurately, and with confidence. And even by focusing on these tiny grammar points, you can make a big difference in how people see you and how well your message hits home.
So on that note, think about this. What if getting a better handle on these little aspects of communication could actually make you more confident? And what if it had a more positive impact on your everyday interactions, both at work and in your personal life? It's definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time.